Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
Air. The air up here is so good. It seems different from the streets, and that wind gently pushing at the boy's chest, as if pushing him away from the edge of the roof and discouraging him from doing what he had planned. Billy drew in a full chest of air and spread his arms out to the side. Just one step and he would soar like a bird. It wouldn't take long, but he would have that feeling of flight. And there were people running around down there. How funny they were. Small, like bugs. Some standing in clusters, some fidgeting, but all, as one, with their heads up, looking up at him, Billy. The boy was thrilled by this feeling of attention. So many people had gathered for him, and they were all thinking about him, worrying about him. And when he took the last step, a wave of terror would sweep through the crowd, and someone would shriek in fright. Billy revels in that sense of crowd control. Mom doesn't know that yet. When they tell her, it's gonna be a blast, that's when she'll regret everything she said to him. Let her cry, let her cry, let her cry. That's what she wants. The amount of yelling Billy's heard from her today. Let his mom choke on that phone she took away from him as punishment. Billy won't need it now, but Mom will regret what she said. She'll feel bad about it. She'll think it'd be better if he did what he wanted and she kept quiet. And that nasty Uncle Arthur, he'll be surprised. He didn't expect that from Billy. He sure didn't. Let him feel guilty too. His stepfather's words to his mother as Billy ran away from the apartment in tears still echoed in the boy's mind. Out of control, your son is completely out of control. You can't keep someone like that in the house. He should be institutionalized. What did Billy do? Well, he didn't sleep at home. What's wrong with that? He's 12 years old. He bet with the boys if he could stay alone in the basement of a high-rise all night. The last light bulb had been blown out and it was completely dark. None of the boys believed it, but Billy could, and he held out until morning. He turned off his phone beforehand, knowing his mom would call. Of course, none of the boys guessed what it had really cost Billy, and now they would never know. After the scandal with his mother and stepfather, Billy jumped out of the apartment very angry. Slamming the door loudly and kicking it with his foot, the boy habitually stuck his hand in his pocket, trying to find his cell phone. There was no phone. That's right. He'd been deprived of that too. How could he call his friends now? Well, he would try to find someone in an abandoned construction site near the soccer field where he and the boys liked to play ball. Older guys went to that construction site, smoking there and sometimes drinking alcohol. Billy and his friends started going there too. Showing off to the older boys, he tried smoking. The boy didn't like it. Tears came to his eyes and coughs tore up his chest. But trying to keep up his mark in front of his elders, he shook his head and said, "Well, I've got into it. I can't live without whitefish at all. First thing in the morning, just a smoke." Billy went to the construction site, but unfortunately, he didn't find his friends there. 3 older boys were sitting on stacked bricks. Billy knew 2 of them well. They had been here often and were in the same high school as Billy in the graduating class. But the third, who at the boy's appearance quickly hid something behind his back, was a stranger to Billy. "That's Billy. He's a friend. You don't have to hide it," said one of the boys Billy knew. "Billy, are you here for a smoke?" "Yeah," Billy answered importantly. "I wanted to find my boys here. I'm out of cigarettes." The unfamiliar guy took out a cigarette from behind his back, puffed it greedily and passed it around. It wasn't even a cigarette, but a cigarette, and it wasn't filled with tobacco, as Billy guessed at once, though he'd never seen such things before. "Do you want a drag?" The stranger squinted at Billy slyly. "What's the matter with you?" One of the construction workers choked on the smoke. "He's just a kid. He's too young." "It's all right. Let him try. Come here, kid, give it a try." The boy handed Billy a cigarette with an unfamiliar sweet odor. The boy approached, eyeing the cigarette warily. He didn't want to take it, but it was embarrassing to lose face in front of the boys. After the first puff, the boy coughed violently. It seemed as if he was going to spit out his insides. It's okay, it happens. Try again," the strange guy encouraged Billy. And Billy did. His head felt foggy and his body felt unusually light. Thoughts flowed smoothly. measuredly, and suddenly felt so good. The boy came out of the construction site swaying slightly. He wanted to fly. That's right, to fly. Billy didn't realize how he had climbed to the roof of the apartment building, but he remembered his thoughts at that moment. Now I'll fly over the city, over the people, and there will be nothing else. Neither the eternally disgruntled mother nor the stepfather who looked at me with a prickly look and curved his lips contemptuously at my appearance. And most importantly, I won't have to go back home, where I'll be nagged and called a difficult child again. The boy stretched his foot forward and thought of his grandmother. How upset she would be. As luck would have it, she was visiting at their house right now. She has something with her heart. She's having a checkup. What if she gets worse from being upset? Man, I don't want her to find out. I feel sorry for Grandma. You can't do that to her. Billy put his foot down. Boy, listen to me, boy. Is something wrong? Came a coaxing voice from the other side of the roof. Billy turned his head and saw a pretty woman. She stretched her open palms forward and continued to speak. I'm not getting any closer. See, I'm standing still. Let's just talk. What's your name? Billy was already 12 and had watched a lot of movies with crime plots, so he knew right away who this aunt was. Now she's gonna talk to him, talk him off the ledge. She will tell him that any problems are solvable. The boy took a deep breath and took a step. Only in the other direction. Billy took a step away from the edge. Don't talk to me. I wasn't going to jump. Just decided to stand on the edge of the roof. I don't know what you're all freaking out about. The woman, not fully believing the apparently unstable teenager, did not try to rush towards him. She continued to smile a glued smile and asked about the problems in the boy's life. I don't have any problems. I told you I wasn't going to jump. Billy, with an unsure, still wobbly gait, headed toward the woman. When the boy was brought to the police building, he thought for some reason that he was going to be pushed into a cell with the hardened criminals. This, of course, did not happen. The boy was brought into a small, cozy office and sat on a soft couch. Opposite him, slightly moving the chair, sat the same aunt who had talked to him on the roof. But no matter how much she questioned why he had gone to the roof, Billy remained stubbornly silent. He lowered his head and mumbled one phrase. I wasn't going to jump, I wasn't. The psychologist sat with Billy for quite a while, but she didn't get anywhere. Then she left the office and went to talk to the boy's mother, who she knew had come to the police a long time ago. The woman, already interviewed by the policeman, sat in the corridor on a hard bench and cried. She was willing to talk to the psychologist. Yes, we scolded Billy and took away his cell phone. He's grounded, you know. Billy does a lot of mischief. How can you not scold him? It's a common story, the psychologist sighed. Children at that age react very strongly to such punishments. They have their whole lives on their phones. To be honest, I have not figured out whether your son was going to jump or not. He was probably just trying to scare you and wasn't planning on jumping. He wasn't pulled off the edge. He went down on his own. Plus, how can I put this to you? The kid's under the influence of drugs. What kind of drug intoxication? He's only 12. What are you implying? I realize how old Billy is, but still, the boy probably smoked weed. There's a distinctive odor from his clothes. You'll take your son now, but I'd strongly advise you to keep him under a doctor's care today. Tomorrow I'll come to your home and the child welfare authorities will be here. As you must realize, your family will be under observation for some time. God, Natalie clutched her head. What a shame. We're perfectly normal people, being monitored by the guardianship authorities. It's embarrassing. Billy walked without lifting his head as his mom picked him up from the police station. The psychologist, who came outside after them, saw the car they were leaving in and muttered, "Oh, I see. You can see from the mother that she has a lot of money, but she can't take care of her child." Natalie drove in silence. She didn't want to talk to her son. She only looked at him in the rearview mirror. The boy sat in the back and never once raised his head. In fact, Billy was very nauseous and was afraid that he would vomit right in the car, and then his mother's silence would be immediately broken by the usual screaming. Contrary to the psychologist's advice, Natalie didn't go to the doctor. That was the last thing she needed right now. Billy looked normal except for his lethargy and cloudy eyes. Natalie sighed heavily. Why couldn't Billy be like all the other kids? Why did he always let her down like that? Now Arthur would speak up again. I told you so, Arthur. Remembering her husband, Natalie craned her neck and turned the mirror slightly to look at her reflection. 6 years ago, when Arthur started courting her, she couldn't believe that such a handsome and young guy could be attracted to her. At that time, the woman was already 38, and Arthur was not even 30. In addition, Natalie had never shone with beauty. Men never paid her any attention. Vankin's father was a fleeting affair and immediately slipped away when he learned that her friend was pregnant, and Natalie hadn't been in a relationship since. And then there's Arthur. Her friends whispered enviously that the guy had stolen Natalia's money. She really did earn very well and was considered a wealthy lady. At first, the woman herself thought so, but Arthur melted her heart, convinced her of his love. And even though he does not work anywhere, but all of Natasha's free time they spend together, his husband is so caring and attentive. Natalie felt herself blossoming like a spring flower under the rays of simple female happiness. Except for Billy. When Natalie and Arthur married, Billy was only 7 years old, but he had already taken his stepfather in stride. He couldn't bear to have him in the house. Natalie understood why his son reacted the way he did. The boy had been spoiled by his mother's love and attention, and he didn't want to share it with anyone. But Mom deserved to be happy too, didn't she? Why should she devote herself only to her child when she finally, for the first time in her life, has a man who loves her and is ready to marry her? Billy, who had been an ordinary, though mischievous child before, went off the rails after his mother's marriage. Natalie became a regular in the principal's office at school. She constantly paid for broken glass, a cracked toilet bowl, and even the office door, which had a huge hole in the center. It seemed like the boy was trying to think of something else to do. Yesterday was the first time he hadn't come home for the night. And now this. He wasn't going to jump anywhere, that's obvious. He's doing it out of spite, trying to get back at me. Billy was always talking about Arthur, saying that in his mother's absence his stepfather called him names, the most affectionate of which was puppy, and even raised a hand against him. Natalie didn't believe it. Given all of her son's bullying antics, it was understandable that he was lying, wanting to separate her from her husband and have her alone again. To be fair, her husband had spanked Billy a couple times in front of her. Just a couple of times in front of her. The woman didn't see anything wrong with it. The boy could use some manly training. The woman drove up to her house and pulled into her favorite parking spot. She got out of the car and waited for her son. But the boy continued to sit in the car. Natalie abruptly yanked open the back door and hissed, "What are you sitting there for, you little bugger? Get out of the car now." "I don't want to." Billy shook his head. "I don't want to go home." Natalie grabbed her son by the sleeve of his expensive sweatshirt and pulled, not afraid to tear it. Arthur was always grumbling that his wife dressed the boy too well, and with the way he handled things, she shouldn't spend so much on the kid. The woman only hummed in response. Her son's clothes were no comparison to how much money she spent on her beloved husband. That's the one who was definitely dressed to the hilt. Natalie always liked to see women staring at her husband, even when she walked beside him. Natalie was proud that this handsome man belonged to her and only to her. "Are you coming out today or not?" The woman pulled her son with all her might. The sweatshirt rattled, coming apart at the seam. Billy rolled out of the car, almost falling to the pavement. "Is Uncle Arthur home?" the boy asked, giving his mother a sidelong glance. "Of course he's home. Where else would he be?" "He's waiting impatiently for you," the woman shouted. "Mom, I really didn't mean to jump off that roof. I just climbed up there and looked down." "I don't doubt it. Go on." Natalie pushed her son in the back. "We'll talk at home." Arthur looked indignantly at Natalie and Billy as they entered the apartment. He had been running through the windows for a long time, waiting for them, and finally he saw a familiar car pulling into his parking space. The man stepped out into the hallway. "Brought the bastard?" he asked his wife with a contemptuous curve of his lips. "And what are you, bastard? You do not live in peace. You have already taken to the roof?" Arthur was boiling with anger. How annoyed he was with this little scoundrel. He already had to live with Natalie, and she wasn't the most attractive woman in the world. And then there was this irritant who was annoying him with his antics. no peace of mind. Arthur looked at his stepson's face and his eyebrows slowly crept up to his forehead. Natalie, what's wrong with him? Is he on some kind of medication? The shrink said he's been smoking pot. What do you mean pot? Is he high? Wow. The man grabbed his head. 12 years, what's gonna happen next? Natalie, this is extreme. How many times have I told you? Your son is a finished man. He's no good. I've told you 100 times. Let's put him in a boarding school for troubled teens. They'll work with him there. I'm not forcing you to give him up, but let him be in a place specially designed for such unruly kids. The psychologist will be visiting us for a while. And by the way, our family is now under guardianship, Natalie said tiredly. Well, it's about time. That's all we need. I'm not surprised it was coming. You never listened to me, and now we'll be considered a dysfunctional family and you'll be a bad mother. Arthur turned his attention to Billy. Why would you say something asshole? Why don't you snap at me like you always do? Oh yeah, you're on drugs, or whatever you call it. You must be feeling good right now, or is it the other way around? You were gonna jump off the roof, weren't you? Why didn't you jump off then? And you're going to jump off the roof yourself. Clean shaven. Came a commanding voice from the depths of the apartment, and after the voice appeared its owner, an elderly woman of small stature, but with an expressive, stern face and a fixed gaze, came out into the hallway. Mom, Natalie exclaimed, why are you interfering? Arthur is trying to educate Billy. Parenting, the woman stretched out. Is that what we call it now? Calling a kid names and slinging mud at him and telling him to jump off a roof is parenting. The old woman looked at Arthur in such a way that he shrank as if he had shrunk in size. And you'll jump off the roof if I hear you say that to my grandson again. Julia, you don't know everything, Arthur wailed in a falsetto. That boy is out of control. He's not just any boy. He's my grandson and your son, by the way, Natalie. He's a bit of a troublemaker, and who at his age doesn't? You've really pissed him off. Natalie, where are your maternal feelings? Why do you let that slick-ass mother of yours pick on that boy? Mom, Billy needs a man's hand, a father's attention. Family? Where do you see a father? Or a husband to yourself? Look at him, he's dressed like a girl. And his hair? He probably goes to your salons, licking his hair. What's that on his head? I wonder what money your husband uses to dress up like that without working. Julia? Arthur squealed. I have a college degree, if you must know. I've been offered a good job more than once, but Natalie doesn't want it. Natalie is against it. Julia mocked the man. Is that a man's word? You're sucking up to my daughter and taking money out of her, and you're hurting Billy too. Natalie, don't you see? This guy doesn't love you. He only wants your money. If you didn't have it, he wouldn't even look at you. That's it, Mom. That's enough. Natalie burst out. I don't want to hear this in my house anymore. I have a family and you're sticking your nose in it. What kind of family is that? All you have is a son and you're listening to this slick. And he's ready to put Billy in boarding school. You're an idiot, Natalie. I'll take Billy to live with me in my village for a while. You can't take him to the village now, Natalie said indignantly. A psychologist will be visiting us in the next few days. Besides, summer vacation is still a month away. So I'll stay with you for a month. What do you mean? Arthur started stuttering. Julia, your examination will last how long? A week? Then go to your village and we'll bring Billy back to you at the end of the school year. Natalie saw the look Arthur gave her when she said that. He could hardly tolerate his mother-in-law's presence in the house, having agreed only for the time she was undergoing a physical examination. Mother, what are you really doing? We don't mind Billy staying with you this summer. It's not a bad idea. We'll bring him ourselves, and you can go away. You've got a farm there. What about your cow and your chickens? The neighbor will look after them. I said I'll stay, so I'll stay. You won't kick me out. Don't forget, daughter, I bought this apartment for you when you weren't earning so much. So I have every right to stay here as long as I want. Come into the kitchen, Billy. I'll make you some tea. I've got some herbs I brought with me, and I'm going to brew you a nice flavor. Julia approached her grandson, unceremoniously pushing Arthur and her daughter out of the way. Billy stood with his back against the front door. The boy hadn't said a word the whole time, preferring not to interfere with the adults' squabbles. When Billy heard about the village, he was sad at first. He didn't want to go there at all. All his friends were here, and soon the summer would be merry. On the other hand, would it be a fun summer for him? Suddenly, Arthur told his mom, and she really will give him to this damn boarding school. Better the countryside. Plus, close to his grandmother. Billy loved his grandmother. Despite her bossy character and stern speech, he always felt love from her. His mother used to be like that too, but Arthur's arrival in the house had changed her a lot. Billy couldn't remember the last time his mother had kissed him or squeezed him like she used to when he was a child. Julia walked over to her grandson and hugged him tightly around the shoulders, pulling him against her warm side. "Come on, Billy, let's have tea." Passing by his stepfather, who was frozen in place, the boy couldn't help himself and threw a triumphant look at him. He loved his grandmother because she was the only one who could put Arthur in his place. The aroma of herbs brewed by his grandmother was extraordinary. It instantly soaked the whole apartment. Billy, who was almost back to normal, inhaled it with pleasure. Immediately, he remembered his grandmother's house in the village, the large veranda where she used to put her grandson to bed in summer, covering him with a warm quilted blanket, and the ringing silence in the morning, broken only by the roosters. Billy squeezed his eyes shut. A whole summer at Grandma's. What would he do without his friends? Well, there was still a whole month to go, and the best part was that Grandma would be here. Arthur wouldn't be able to humiliate him in front of her or hit him, as he often did in his mom's absence. The hot summer was coming to an end. Billy had never imagined that he would enjoy living in the countryside with his grandmother so much. And there were no problems with friends here either. The boy had new ones, from the local boys and from those who, like him, had been sent here for the summer. The boys ran around the village all day long. In hot weather, they raced to the local river, ate strawberries in the fields. In general, always found something to occupy themselves. It was possible to stay out late, but Billy tried not to abuse it, for his grandmother would not go to bed without waiting for his grandson. Billy came home with joy, because he had delicious pies, steamed milk in the morning, and most importantly, his grandmother's love. Not like with his mother and stepfather, when Billy just didn't want to come home sometimes. It wasn't without pranks, of course. No matter how hard Billy tried to keep his impetuous nature in check so as not to upset his grandmother, he didn't always succeed. One of the biggest incidents had been a fire when Billy and two other kids had almost burned down a local farmhouse when they decided to build a fire behind it and roast sausages. Then Grandma got really mad and beat her grandson on his bare feet with nettles. But Billy was not offended, and stroking his burning feet, he realized that he had received a well-deserved beating. It was only a pity that the summer flew by, and in the last days of August, Natalie came to pick up her son. The woman came alone, without her husband by train. She didn't stay the night, despite Julia Stepanovna's entreaties. "Mom, I can't stay late. First of all, I have work, and secondly, we've already delayed. It's high time to dress Billy for school, and we've only got a few days left." All right, the old woman mumbled. "Go ahead. But look after your husband, Natalie, and don't let him torment Vanya. It's not right." "Yes, the boy's a spoiled sport, but you weren't so good when you were a child either. Remember yourself and don't scold Billy unnecessarily." Natalie was silent to all her mother's admonitions and only moved her eyebrows. It was strange, but she didn't seem to miss her son at all. This summer had been wonderful for her. Arthur had been more attentive than ever, also always calm. No one else disturbed the peace of the family, and the couple managed to go on vacation at the sea without Billy and his constant antics. But all good things come to an end. Like summer, and there's no getting away from it. Billy has to go to school, so I had to pick him up. Natalie hoped that in 3 months her son had matured and settled down a little. Arthur met Billy calmly and even kindly, which the boy was surprised by. Of course, Billy couldn't have guessed how much his stepfather was actually waiting for him to come home, just not with the best of intentions. Arthur's life wasn't standing still this summer either. The man had a new girlfriend, a very young girl, long-legged, beautiful. Natalie worked a lot, so Arthur had enough time to spend with his new girlfriend. But to go out with a girl like that, you needed money. Young beauties have big demands. And although Natalie did not limit her husband in money, but still, for large sums had to at least somehow account for it. His wife could ask him at any time what he bought for such a sum. And here, a new girlfriend asked for an expensive cell phone. Arthur already broke his head what to ask his wife for money so as not to arouse suspicion, but he could not think of anything. It was at that moment that he remembered Billy, and an insidious plan emerged in the man's mind. On Friday of the first school week, Billy was hurrying home from school. It was kind of strange, but the boy was going to go with his stepfather to pick out a new refrigerator. Arthur himself had suggested it to Billy. The man had been telling his wife for a long time that the old refrigerator had fallen into disrepair. The food in it was getting frozen or spoiled. Natalie had no time to deal with the purchase, so she cashed in the money, asking her husband to buy the refrigerator himself. Unexpectedly, her stepfather asked Billy to go with him. The boy agreed. Somehow lately, the stepfather was not like himself, not picking on his stepson and talking kindly. Because of this, Billy himself began to try to keep himself in check. The boy restrained himself from unnecessary antics, not wanting to cause negativity. He agreed to buy a refrigerator with his stepfather. Maybe if his relationship with him improved, his mother would be nicer to him. Billy entered the apartment almost at the same time as his mother, who had arrived from work and had been summoned by Arthur with an urgent call. "What's the matter?" the woman asked. "Why are you yanking me around in the middle of the workday? What's wrong?" At these words, Natalie glanced at her son, who was throwing his briefcase off his shoulders, and exhaled a sigh of relief. After her husband's call, she had certainly feared that the call was related to a new prank, but apparently it was not. The son entered the apartment quite calmly. Unfortunately, after a couple of minutes, the woman changed her mind after listening to the agitated Arthur. "Natalie, you remember I was going to go shopping for a refrigerator today. You told me to get the latest model, more expensive. While I was waiting for Billy to come home from school to take it with me, I went to the nightstand for the money and it wasn't there. I went through the whole apartment. Natalie, the money's gone." "What do you mean, it's gone?" Natalie was confused. "Did you take a good look?" The woman rushed into the bedroom and went through the nightstand again. Then she looked back at her husband and Billy, who were frozen in the doorway. "Not really," she shrugged. "Have thieves been breaking in?" "What thieves, Natalie? If they were thieves, they wouldn't just take the money. All your jewelry and valuables are in place, I checked. Besides, how could the thieves know we had money in the nightstand? It's not like the apartment's been ransacked." Billy shivered as his mother and stepfather's eyes locked on him. "Billy," his mother said softly, "did you take the money?" The boy staggered back in surprise. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I didn't take it." And then Arthur behaved in a way that was not typical, not like his usual behavior. "Natalie, let's not slander Billy for nothing. We're going to go and quietly check his room." Billy was seething with anger at the unfair accusations. Anger and a burning resentment that turned to surprise when his mother pulled from under his mattress a carton of cigarettes, a new speaker, and a few other inexpensive little things that had obviously been bought recently. "This isn't mine," the boy blinked his eyes. "This is the first time I've seen all this." Tears of resentment covered his eyes, and he could not see the time of departure of the train to his grandmother's village on the scoreboard. The teenager was at the train station, and he had come here on foot after he had jumped out of his apartment without even having time to change his clothes. Right in his school suit. He didn't even take his cell phone out of his briefcase. He didn't have time for that. It was a long walk to the train station, and it took a long time to get there, but Billy couldn't calm down. Tears of resentment flowed by themselves, and the boy rubbed his eyes, turning them into narrow, swollen slits. How unfair it was. Why didn't his mother believe him? Yes, Billy could do a lot of things, but he would never steal. He wouldn't take an extra dime without asking. He didn't shoplift, although there were some of his friends who would slip a candy bar from the supermarket shelf into his pocket. Billy had always had a very negative attitude towards stealing. Did Mom know that? She looked at him with such contempt, as if he were a stranger. And his stepfather only added fuel to the fire. All the goodwill he'd shown the boy in the last few days was gone. He screamed, spitting spittle. A thief, a petty, sneaky thief. Stealing from his own people, from his own family. Stealing from his own mother. You shouldn't be allowed in the house, you thief. You belong in juvie. I didn't take anything. I didn't take anything. Mom, why don't you believe me? Billy shouted desperately. Where did all this come from? The woman pointed her hand at the things found under the boy's mattress, spread out on the bed. Can you explain what you bought it all with? I can't, I didn't. It's not mine. I don't understand where it came from. Stupid to deny. Natalie remained calm for some reason. But that calmness frightened Billy even more, and even more so, his mom's stare. She'd never looked at him like that before, not even when he'd almost jumped off the roof. Arthur continued to yell, using his usual vocabulary and calling the boy nasty words. That's when Billy boiled up and allowed himself something he'd never allowed in his stepfather's direction. Shut up, he shouted. Shut up, you creep. You're lying. You're lying. Arthur stumbled back in surprise and stood staring at the boy with his mouth open. Billy didn't see it anymore. He couldn't see anything in front of him. A burning resentment swept over him and he ran headlong out of the apartment. At first, the teenager ran, running for his life. Then he took a step. Where to go? What to do? Now his mom would definitely put him in boarding school. Billy was sure of that. He'd stolen the money, sassed the stepfather his mom listened to so much. Of course, what would she want with a son like that? Grandma, she's the only one who can help. I wish I could get to her. She'll hug and caress and comfort. She'll know that wasn't Billy who took the goddamn money. And now Billy's standing at the train station looking at the scoreboard. No, it can't be. The boy rubbed his eyes again, wiping away the tears. Had he missed today's train? That's right. The next one wouldn't be until tomorrow. Where would he go until then? To his friends is not an option. His mom will find him there right away, so he'll have to hang out on the streets till tomorrow. The rest of the day, Billy wandered aimlessly through the streets of the city. Toward evening, he went back to the station. It was light, and there were benches to sit on all night. That was Billy's plan, except that he didn't realize that there was a policeman on duty at the station. After half an hour in the waiting room, the policeman began to look at him with interest. Of course, it was getting towards night, and the boy was here alone and in a school suit. Billy realized that it all looked suspicious, and sooner or later the policeman would inquire about the purpose of the boy's stay at the station. He jumped out of the building and took a quick step away from the station. What now? Where to spend the night? Maybe in the basement? Billy remembered his night spent in a dark basement on a bed and shuddered. No, he wouldn't want that to happen again. Better a construction site like the one he and his friends used to go to smoke. That's right, they'd have to find a construction site where they could spend the night. Billy searched for a construction site until dark. To his dismay, there was nothing like it on his way. The boy began to despair when he saw an abandoned building. Apparently, it had once been a business, but now it was just a derelict with a half-collapsed roof and broken, wreathed windows. The boy walked almost all the way around the building before he found one of the entrances with a door that had long since been kicked in. Broken bottles and brick fragments crunched loudly under Billy's feet. It was scary. The teenager decided not to go too far and entered a room on the first floor, near the entrance. Entering the room, the boy was startled to see that he was not alone. In the flickering light of a thin candle sat two homeless men of indeterminate sex, one of whom held a greasy glass with an incomprehensible liquid in his hand, and the other was eating something strange, maybe taken from the trash. Billy froze in place. The bums turned at the sound of footsteps and squinted into the darkness. It's a kid, one of them said in a drunken voice. Kid, why are you climbing construction sites at night? Nothing, Billy answered fearfully. Can I stay here till morning? I won't disturb you. The bums looked at each other. I see. Did you run away from home? One of them laughed hoarsely. Despite the hoarseness in his voice, Billy realized it was a woman. All right, sit down. There's nothing to buy you. I'm not hungry, thank you, Billy lied, though his stomach rumbled at the mention of food. By the scanty light of the candle, the boy made something like a bench out of bricks and sank down on it tiredly. The bums did not bother the boy with questions. They continued to drink without paying attention to him. Billy quickly fell asleep and dozed off in a sitting position, pressing his cheek against the cold brick wall. It was late in the day, and the time was getting late. When the bums had drunk their mess, one of them, a man, got up and went to the bathroom. As he passed Billy, he scrutinized him, The light from the lantern from the window opening fell on the boy. "Maruska," the man hissed, "look at the nice suit on the boy. How many bubbles can you get one of these for?" Billy woke abruptly, jerked out of his oblivion into reality, a horrible reality. There were strangers' hands all over his body. It was so scary. Darkness all around, only the stench of unwashed bodies. The boy didn't immediately realize what was being done to him. "Take off your jacket, kid," mumbled the soaked homeless woman, trying to undo the buttons. "Take off your suit. It will be your payment for sleeping in our apartments." The policeman stared at the woman sitting in front of him in bewilderment. "Are you serious? Did I understand you correctly? Your 12-year-old son hasn't been home since yesterday, and you've just come to see us?" Natalie hesitated. "You see, here's the thing. My son is a troubled teenager, and he hasn't been home at night before. I was hoping to the last minute that he'd come home on his own." The policeman who took the missing child report examined the woman with great judgment. Usually moms of children make a panic in the first couple of hours if the child does not contact. But here it had been over 24 hours, and the mother had only deigned to worry. Natalie could see the judgment in her eyes, and she wanted to tell the policeman that her son had stolen money from the house and was probably skipping school. But her mother's words, spoken over the phone a couple hours ago, still echoed in her mind. "Natalie, don't tell the police that Billy stole the money. It's not true. I'll never believe it." "What are you trying to do? Get your son booked? If you think of telling me that, I'll come and report you to the police. That's where the theft comes from. Look for Billy. Your son hasn't been home for 24 hours and you've been sitting still." "Mom, I thought he'd come back like he used to. And you're wrong about Arthur. He has no reason to steal money from me. I give him money for everything he needs. You mustn't talk badly about my husband." "You don't? Is it okay to speak ill of your son? I've told you many times and I'll tell you again, you're a fool, daughter, a fool. Look for your son. Go to the police immediately and file a missing persons report. And do whatever you have to do in such cases. I come to town myself, but I'm thinking, what if Billy shows up here and I'm not home and he's gone again? But when you go to the police, don't mention the money." Natalie hummed up in frustration. She already regretted calling her mother. She had done it out of the faint hope that Billy was there in the village and then she wouldn't have to embarrass herself with the police. She had to. The policeman held out a business card to Natalie. "Look, we'll do what we can, but I suggest you call this number. They're volunteers. We need to find that child immediately. They're gonna start combing the city tonight." "Okay." Natalie gritted her teeth and took the card. At that very moment, Billy was sitting in an abandoned house, wrapped in an old, dirty blanket that the homeless men had thrown over him after they had taken away his suit and shirt, leaving him in just his panties. Waking up in the middle of the night, when the bums were pulling off his suit, the boy tried to resist violently, but the forces were unequal. The result of the fight was a bruise shimmering under Billy's right eye. After the bums took the suit, they left, but before they did, the woman took pity on the shaking boy and threw him a rag, which turned out to be a shabby, smelly blanket. "Here, cover yourself up, or you'll freeze to death." Billy was reluctant to touch the odor-exhausting rag, but the September night was not warm. After sitting naked on the cold bricks for a while, the teenager was so cold his teeth chattered. He grabbed a blanket from the dirt floor and wrapped himself in it, trying not to breathe. It felt a little warmer. It didn't get any warmer, and for the rest of the night, Billy sat awake, occasionally jumping up and down to keep warm. Morning came, and Billy still couldn't get out of the abandoned building. He was ashamed to stick his head out like that. What would people do when they saw him? They'd take him to the police, of course, realizing the kid was in trouble, but the police will take him home. They'll tell him about the stolen money, and that's it. What lies ahead for Billy? Billy ran around the abandoned building all day, looking out all the overgrown windows. He hoped some teenager around his age would walk by and ask for help, at least some clothes so he wouldn't draw attention to himself. Except that the abandonment was in an industrial zone, and passersby were rare there, let alone children. At least the day was warm and the boy could finally warm up, or at least stop shaking. But there was another problem. Billy was terribly hungry and thirsty. It got to the point that the boy in desperation raked through the trash left by the homeless, hoping to find something to eat. He found nothing but rotten apple slices and empty cans. Toward evening, Billy felt like crying again. He realized that the train to his grandmother's village was long gone. Billy considered himself a rather mature boy, and he was ashamed to admit it, but now more than anything else he wanted to be near his grandmother, to have her hold him close to her, stroke his head, and promise that everything would be all right. She was the only one the boy could trust in this life. Night had fallen outside, and the homeless couple from last night were returning to one of their sleeping places. This week the bums had been living in this very abandoned house. Lighting the way with a blinking flashlight, a woman walked ahead of them. Suddenly, in the dim circle of the flashlight, a figure appeared, curled up under an old blanket. "Oh," cried the homeless woman, "who is it here? Kid, have you been sitting here all day? You didn't go anywhere." "Where would I go like this?" answered Billy in a thin, chilled voice. The hobos were very lucky to have the suit. When they saw it on the boy yesterday, even they realized that it was expensive. Natalie's desire for nice things had played tricks on Billy. "Do you have any water?" Billy asked. "Oh boy, you must be hungry. All right, we're going out tonight. Come on, we'll feed you." In a couple of minutes, the teenager sat next to the homeless men who had robbed him by the wavering light of a thin candle, stuffing his mouth with Sprat and tomato sauce and drinking water from a dirty bottle, forgetting his squeamishness. When the satiated boy moved away to his stack of bricks and tried to doze off, the woman who had gotten drunk on alcohol, which, by the way, had been bought with the money from Vanya's suit, said to her drinking buddy, "We should get some clothes for the boy in the morning." "No way," muttered the drunken bum. "I'm not going to spend money on him. Nobody's talking about buying him. We'll look for something at the dump. What do you want him to do? Die here because of us?" The ER doctor looked at the old woman with judgment. "You have a terrible tachycardia with your diagnosis. You need to be hospitalized immediately." "I said I'm not going," Julie replied stubbornly. "Do your injection there. Give me a pill. I need to be home." "What shot?" "Well, we'll take the tachycardia away. What if she has a heart attack?" "With your diagnosis." Diagnosis, diagnosis, diagnosis. I shouldn't have shown you those papers. Despite her poor health, Julia still had her bossy tone, and the doctor gave in. She gave the old woman an injection and sat with her until she felt better, and then she left, muttering unhappily that the old people were driving themselves to the grave with their stubbornness. Julia might have taken Billy to live with her forever after the roof incident, but she'd been stopped by the damn diagnosis. Her worn-out heart was failing and there was something wrong with the valve. Surgery wasn't recommended. The woman might not survive it. She didn't know how long she had left, probably not long at all. "Then I have to live. Yes, I have to live, for Billy's sake." Julia decided and picked up the phone. "Natalie, I got Billy. Yes, he's here. Why are you yelling, you stupid bitch? Why don't you ask if your son's okay? Cancel your search. Billy stays here for now." "Mom, he can't stay with you. The police have to talk to him at least. Besides, he's got school. I'll come get him tomorrow." "Don't bother. I'll bring my grandson to town myself. I'll stay with you again for a while. I can't leave the boy with you." "Now, about the missing money. Did you talk to the clean-cut man?" "Don't start, Mother. I told you before, Arthur couldn't have taken the money." "Who do you think did? Billy? If you talk to him about your money, I'll give you a life of paradise with your slick. I'm still in condition, you know me. You don't want to open up about your Arthur, then forget about the money, but don't you dare mention it to Billy." Julia had a lot more to say to her daughter before she hung up. She did it all in the other room so her grandson wouldn't hear, and when she was done talking, she came out to the boy. "Billy, did you mean it when you said you wanted to live here with me? Are you sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure. It's everything I've dreamed of these last few days. This summer was the best summer of my life. I wanted it to never end. I don't want to go home and see Uncle Arthur and Mom." "Not even Mom?" Julia asked quietly. Billy lowered his head. "Yes, and Mom too. She listens to Uncle Arthur all the time and swears at me. That's how she could believe I stole the money. You knew right away it wasn't true. Sooner or later my stepfather would convince my mom to put me in boarding school. It's nice that we have a big village with a school. It's only till the 9th grade, but we'll see. Do you agree to study in this school, Billy? Yes, I agree, nodded the teenager with hope. Then we'll fight to keep you with me. We'll fight until we win, Julia said. Natalie drove the car with irritation. She braked sharply at the red light and missed the moment when the light turned green. They honked impatiently behind her. Blink your own horn, Natalie muttered angrily. She was very angry. Angry at her mother, who'd started this whole custody thing with Billy. Not that the woman was against her son living in the village for a while, but it would have to be unofficial, without any paperwork. On the other hand, to transfer a boy to a village school, you need a reason. So Julia had made a mess of the custody thing. Natalie was somewhat surprised when the guardianship officers, who had been visiting their home for a long time, sided with the grandmother. For some reason, they didn't like the situation in the family. And then there was the psychologist who had visited Billy after the incident on the roof. There was even talk of terminating Natalie's parental rights, but she rebelled. What do you mean, termination? Why would she be so embarrassed? Is she a bad mom? Billy is clothed, the fridge is stocked, and everything is the best. No, Natalie couldn't agree to that. So Julia asked her daughter to voluntarily sign the papers for Billy to stay with her temporarily for family reasons. What kind of custody could mom get with her diagnosis? If the caseworkers found out about him, they'd be out of the question. But even then, Julia threatened her daughter, saying that if her daughter mentioned her heart, she'd give them a good time. She'd move right in with them. I'll never leave my grandson again, the old woman said. If you don't give him to me in the village, I'll come to live with you, and you can't do anything to me. Do not forget who bought your apartment. Arthur, having learned about such statements of his mother-in-law, waved his hands at his wife. Natalie signed everything. Let Billy live with her. You know that she will not rust. She can fulfill her threats. Well, if the old lady wants a mess, let her have it in the form of an out-of-control grandson. It's embarrassing, Natalie shrugged. It's embarrassing in front of people. How will I explain to my acquaintances why my son lives in the village with his grandmother? It doesn't matter. People. I don't care what they say. But remember how we lived the last summer and imagine that it will always be like that. And so Natalie was on her way to sign the papers. She'd been pulled out of work. The woman decided to sign, even though she was angry. It's embarrassing in front of her friends. Well, let them say what they want. At least now in my family with Arthur will reign in peace, muttered the woman and accelerated at the traffic lights, rushing forward. Oh, how cool it is here. A girl with a rare name, Martha, was running her fingers over the expensive finish of the hallway. Arthur, why haven't you ever brought me here before? Your Kikamura's always at work. Arthur brought home his girlfriend for the first time and was very nervous. Although on the one hand, what was there to be nervous about? The man knew that Natalie wouldn't come home until the evening. It was like that every day. And Martha had asked him to come home a long time ago. Martha knew he was married and was privy to many aspects of her and Natalie's married life. And the girl was fine with that. She didn't care that her new chosen one was a married man, as long as he made her expensive gifts more often. Martha went into the living room and sat down on the sofa. How nice. I don't know why you and I have been staying in hotels so far. You said yourself, the Kikamura is never home during the day. Come here, Arthur. The girl's eyes fell on the home theater and she jumped up from the couch. Cool, let's put some music on with you. Does he boom loudly? What music? The neighbors. What neighbors? It's daytime, and in the daytime you can do anything, even renovate your apartment. Turn on the music. Arthur obeyed the girl's wish, but didn't turn up the volume much. He was afraid that Natalie's neighbors would report how he was having fun in her absence. His wife might find it suspicious. Arthur was not a music lover. The man was stiff, feeling out of place, having brought Martha here. It was unaccustomed. It seemed as if Billy from school would come racing in at any moment. Arthur, why are you so stiff? Martha wrapped her arms around the man. Let's have a drink and relax. After a drink of cognac, the warmth spread through Arthur's body and his thoughts flowed smoothly. No, what am I really doing? Natalie's definitely not coming. In our whole life together, it's never happened that she came home in the daytime for no reason. Billy lives in the country now, and with any luck, he'll stay there forever. I got Natalie to sign the papers, and now that witch is going to take her damn grandson. We can live in peace. Arthur, why don't you show me your bedroom? Martha, interrupting the man's meaning, pulled him by the arm, playfully guiding him with her painted eyes. Arthur smiled, finished the rest of the cognac, and loudly placing the empty glass on the coffee table, allowed himself to be drawn into the bedroom. Wow, Martha exclaimed with delight when she saw the huge bed. She let go of Arthur's hand and sprang onto it. Then, assuming a beautiful pose, she patted the bedspread with her hand. Come here, darling. Now I'm going to thank you for my new phone. My gratitude will be boundless. You'll love it. Those were the words Natalie had heard when she entered the apartment a few minutes ago. She, after signing the custody papers, decided not to go straight to work, but to go home to calm down, to talk to her husband. The couple couldn't hear the sound of the front door opening because of the music playing. The landlady was stunned in the hallway when she saw the young woman's sandals. Even then, Natalie felt a pain of suspicion. She tiptoed toward the bedroom. Her legs were pounding and shaking, but she could make out the words of the young, pretty girl who was sprawled on her bed. A cell phone, huh? Expensive. Natalie said in an icy voice, her outward expression not betraying the storm inside her. Arthur, who instantly became whiter than the wall, found nothing better to do than to mutter a banal phrase. Natalie, you've got it all wrong. What is there to misunderstand? Everything is clear, except where did you get the money for such expensive gifts for this? No matter how hard Natalie tried, she couldn't keep her composure for long and broke into a shrill scream. Get out. Get out of here. Get out of my apartment, both of you. The girl jumped up from the bed and tried to rush past her landlady, but Natalie, eyes burning furiously, clawed at her hair. Arthur stood frozen to the floor, watching his wife dragging Martha across the bedroom floor, pulling at her hair and scratching her face bloody. Natalie gnawed at the pillow with her teeth and howled like a wounded wolf. Her head throbbed like a glowing ball of fire and seemed about to explode with hatred and anger. It hurt. How it hurt. She had given Arthur all of herself. She even stopped fighting for her son, having sent him to his grandmother and signed all the documents for temporary custody. Only if Arthur was happy, only if they were well together and nothing broke their family idyll. And he cheated on her, cheated with a young girl, and dragged her to Natasha's apartment on the family bed. And he has nothing of his own here. He came in his underwear. Natalie dressed him, put on his shoes, bought him a car. And how she loved him. She looked into his mouth and listened to his every word. What a bastard, what a bastard. Natalie's face pressed into the pillow, and she felt her right cheek burning with a huge scratch that was still bleeding. Her opponent, having recovered a little, tried to resist, but that scratch was the only thing she could do to Natalie, who herself ran away all battered, with torn-out gash on her head. When the girl managed to escape Natalie's grasp, she sprinted out of the apartment like a scalded woman, whimpering in pain. Arthur stood in one place, silently watching the beating and making no attempt to intervene. The man feverishly made excuses, although he realized that it was stupid. It was foolish to deny his treason. Now one must ask for forgiveness. Natalie sat on the floor, out of breath, disheveled, with a bleeding cheek. She slowly raised her eyes and looked up into her husband's face. There was silence between them for a few seconds. Arthur was the first to break it. Natalie, forgive me, I beg you. I don't know how it happened. It was like some kind of eclipse. But it's the first time, I swear. And it'll never happen again. Yes, it won't. Natalie nodded, getting up from the floor. You better tell me, what did you give that little girl a cell phone for? As I understand it, she wasn't going to thank you so eagerly for a cheap model, was she? Arthur, who had not expected such a question, was confused. He had nothing to say, and Natalie answered her own question. It's money for the refrigerator, isn't it? The man lowered his head and his wife started screaming again. You bastard, you took the money yourself and blamed it on Billy. And you planted cigarettes on him, just to be sure. How could you do that? Because of this, my son's going to live with his mom. You gave that. A cell phone bought with my money that I earned. You pay for your affairs with my money. Natalie felt like she was going to burst into tears, but she didn't want to do it in front of her cheating boyfriend. So she screamed, "Get out of my apartment. Get out now." Natalie, Arthur took a step towards his wife and held out his hand. The woman recoiled like a leper. "Go away," I said. "I don't want to see you. Get out." The rest of the day and all night, Natalie sobbed into her pillow, smearing bitter tears and blood from her scratched cheek. In the morning, she could hardly pull herself together to go to work. Nothing was going well for the woman. She couldn't concentrate on work. All her thoughts were only about the affair. That betrayal burned Natalie with fire. And also the incomprehension of what to do now, how to live. All her prosperous and beautiful life was just a picture. Her friends were always jealous of her. How could they admit that her husband had cheated? And Natalie lost her son because of that despicable traitor. With the money Arthur had when he left his wife's apartment, he rented an inexpensive apartment for a month. He had no desire to call or meet Marta. He had lost all interest in her. The affair had no meaning now. In his head, there were only thoughts of the essentials. What to live on now? Get a job? Arthur didn't like working. Begging his wife for forgiveness? Judging by the fire in her eyes when she kicked Arthur out of the house, it was unlikely. Certainly not now. Huddled in a cheap apartment, the man waited a few days, letting Natalie cool down. Then he called. The woman picked up the phone from the third time, and from there Arthur received such a stream of swear words that he realized it was useless to talk about forgiveness. Then he mentioned getting his things back. "What's your stuff?" Natalie yelled. "Where do you see your stuff? I bought it all. You'll get nothing from me, nothing, you hear me? You bastard, live in what you can carry. I'd rather give your clothes to the homeless." Arthur had almost no money left. He had to make do with pasta. But he wanted to eat good food, like he'd been used to when he lived with Natalie. He wanted to go to a restaurant. What to do? Natalie would probably file for divorce. Maybe he should find himself a new rich lady. The thought of starting all over again made Arthur cringe. How hard it is to woo greedy women. At the very least, you need a decent closet and money for the first time to make a splash. Arthur didn't have that. Looking for a job. "Yeah, I guess there's nowhere to go, so I'll have to get a job." Any job that came along, now was not the time to choose. When Natalie came home from work in the evenings, she hovered around the apartment. There was nothing to occupy herself with. The pain of the affair was still there. If Billy were home, she wouldn't be alone. She could have talked to her son, gone out with him after all. But Arthur had deprived her of that too. Loneliness gnawed at the woman, gnawed from the inside, as well as unrelenting pain. Natalie filed for divorce from Arthur immediately, the next day, after she caught her husband with this girl. And it didn't make her feel any better. The divorce wasn't for another month. It was hard for Natalie to imagine how she would meet Arthur. As long as she didn't get hysterical and curse him, she couldn't do that. It would be a sign of weakness. She must try to remain calm. It seemed to Natalie that her husband would keep trying to contact her, begging for forgiveness. But a week had passed and her husband had called only once, and that was about things. Natalie's mind was filled with horrible images of him living with that girl. It made it all the more painful. Billy liked living in the country. No, not in the country, at his grandmother's. In the city, of course, was better, but there was no grandmother there. Only now the boy was happy when he came home from school. And even if there were not even 10 people in his class, but they were friends, many of whom the boy had made friends with during the summer. And then there was Leslie, unapproachable classmate Leslie, whom Billy didn't know which side to approach, but whom he liked a lot. The girl, like him, had moved to the village from the city, only with her parents. They'd sort of decided to go into farming. Leslie was wary of the local boys, especially Billy, who was known as a bully. But nevertheless, in time, Billy found an approach to the unapproachable girl. All these worries gave Billy's life a special meaning, and he tried to behave more solidly, more mature. When he had a tricky idea in his head, his first thought was, how would his grandmother feel about it? Wouldn't she be upset? Trying not to cause her unnecessary anxiety, so as not to cause another attack of pain in the heart, the boy denied himself many tricks, but this did not make life less interesting. Billy ran home elated. Today, Leslie had let him walk her home. The boys looked at him enviously as Billy walked out of the school building, solidly taking his briefcase from Leslie and carrying it himself. No one teased and taunted Billy, however. The local boys had been respecting the bully friend since the summer for his desperate character. The boy was in such a hurry to tell his grandmother about Leslie that he didn't notice the familiar car peering out of the neighborhood or the raincoat hanging on the wooden rack. It wasn't until he burst into the kitchen that he found his mother drinking tea with a sweet cake. "Billy, hi. Are you here yet?" The woman jerked, intending to get up from her seat, and Billy involuntarily took a step backward. Natalie grimaced and sank back onto the stool. "What are you doing here?" Billy asked gruffly, afraid that his mother might want to take him back to town. "I came to visit you, and I can't." The woman jumped up. "Natalie, don't be so hard on your son. Give him a kiss or something." "It's been a month," Julia frowned. "I don't think Billy's very happy to see me." "What's there to be happy about? The kid hasn't had much fun living with you these last few years." "Well, there's no need to reminisce. Billy, sit down and have some pie while it's warm." "I'll eat at my place," Billy replied. And after he had piled the pie on his plate, he left the kitchen. Natalie looked after her son with resentment. It's okay, Natalie," Julia said softly. "Billy's mad at you, of course, but he's easygoing. You should at least repent to your son. Tell him you found out who took the money. You could apologize to Billy." "I was going to, but he's so..." Natalie shrugged. "So prickly. You should come visit us more often. Billy will come around. Now that you finally opened your eyes to your slicker and kicked him out, life can go differently. I'm not young, and as you know, I'm sick. You get your son's trust back and he'll come back to you. If things work out between you two, I'll be happy. I'm enjoying my life with Billy, though. It's like I'm younger. It wasn't easy being alone." "Yes, it was," Natalie sighed, her eyes downcast. "But don't worry, being alone is good for you. You've realized what your husband is, and thank God. What's going on with the divorce, by the way? Are you free?" "No, Mom. Arthur didn't show up in court. The divorce has been postponed for a month." "What do you mean, postponed? What's that all of a sudden? You have no children together, nothing to divide. You could have insisted if you wanted to. Are you getting soft again?" "I'm not soft. We'll be divorced in a month. I might have wanted him to show up at the trial. I wanted to see his brazen eyes, but I'll see it in a month. Then we'll be divorced." "Mom, I came to get Billy. I wanted to take him home, and he's running away from me like hell." "What did you want him to do?" "Not all at once. You hurt your son. You hurt him bad. He suffered because of you. The boy's heart is ice-crusted and needs time to thaw. Take a leave of absence from work. Live with us for a while, and your son will be drawn to you." "I don't know. I'll think about it. Maybe after the divorce." Natalie left her mother with a heavy heart. Only at the last moment she took Vanya's things out of the car, hoping that she wouldn't have to leave them behind. She'd hoped to return to the city with her son. But Billy showed his unwillingness to communicate with his mother, and Natalie was unable to apologize to her son for the unfounded suspicion of money theft, though she had come here with that very intention. But she couldn't speak when she looked at her son, who was as prickly as a hedgehog. The woman left the village in the morning. This time she had come here by car. It was a long way back. Getting here, Natalie had imagined that she and Billy would drive home together and discuss many things on the way. But it didn't happen. As Natalie left the house, Billy came out too. It was time for him to go to school. The woman awkwardly, sideways approached her son and kissed him on the cheek for the first time in a long time. Billy let his mother do it, but afterward, he ran straight to school, remembering to wave goodbye to his grandmother. Natalie had a difficult journey home. Ahead of her was an empty apartment and anguish for Arthur. No matter how hard she tried to get her husband out of her mind, she couldn't do it. Waking up in the morning and falling asleep at night, she thought of him, alone in a cold bed. Somehow the pleasant moments came to mind, evenings together, his tenderness in the bedroom, coffee in bed in the morning, which her husband sometimes spoiled Natalie with. The memories of the affair still pained Natalie deeply. There were still unanswered questions. Did Arthur ever love her? Or had he lived with Natalie because it was convenient? Was it a one-time affair, or was the cheating systematic? And Natalie was also very much concerned about who her husband was living with now, alone or with this girl of his. It tormented the woman to such an extent that she could not stand it and turned to a private detective. She hired him to find out where and with whom her husband was living. She couldn't just call Arthur, and he didn't call, which pissed Natalie off. When the detective reported back a couple of days later, Natalie exhaled with satisfaction when she learned that Arthur lived alone in a rented apartment. And what's more, the man had gone to work. He had taken a job as a sales consultant in an appliance store. It wasn't easy work, but Natalie was happy about it. The divorce trial was coming up, and Natalie hoped Arthur would show up this time. Then she could look him in the eye. As much as Arthur's whole being resisted it, he had to get a job. There was nothing to live on. At the appliance store he'd taken a job at, the manager was a woman. Of course, she was not a match for Natalie in terms of income, and she was older, but she was unmarried. Arthur was in no position to choose. He tried to make a move on the principal. The man didn't go to the divorce court either. He didn't care about it at the time. He was diligently working on his principal, and the woman seemed to give in. Arthur in his thoughts was already living off her. But unfortunately for the man, their romance ended on the first trip to the restaurant. Arthur habitually expected that the wealthy lady will pay the bill, and the woman frowned upon hearing such hints. She still had to pay, because Arthur did not have the necessary amount, and he ordered himself at the same time, not shy in the choice of dishes. After this meeting, the director of the store did not want to look in the direction of Arthur, quickly recognizing him as an Alfonso. The man was afraid that now he had only a few days left to work in this store. Arthur blamed himself for the fact that living with Natalie, he completely lost his grip. His debts were piling up, and the rich ladies wouldn't take his bait. In the end, Arthur completely despaired. The only way out of the situation was to try to get Natalie back, even if it meant humiliation. Several times, after an unsuccessful trip to the restaurant with the director, Arthur wanted to go to Natalie to wait for her at the entrance to crawl at her feet. But the man restrained himself from doing so. He should give her time, let her realize how hard it was for her to be alone. It is unlikely that at this age, unsympathetic Natalie has a chance to find a new life partner. She must understand that. Arthur prepared for the court appearance with great care. He tidied up his hair and dressed up, using the money he had borrowed again. The man came to the court an hour before the appointed time. He walked around the building, intending to catch Natalie on the street. And there she was. Arthur saw his wife's cheeks flush when she spotted him getting out of the car. Yep, so she cares. She still cares. Arthur quickly concocted a pained expression on his face. Natalie slowly walked up the steps to her husband standing by the door and didn't know how to start a conversation. But she didn't have to. He spoke on his own. Natalie, Arthur held out his arms to the woman as if he wanted to hug her, but immediately lowered them, pulling himself away. I've missed you, Natalie. Why didn't you come to the first meeting? Natalie asked, trying to appear indifferent. I couldn't divorce you, and I can't even now. How could I ruin our love for a fleeting mistake? I love you. I've always loved you. I've been a little weak. It's okay. Can one stupid mistake ruin all our happy years? Stupidity? Is that what you call it? If I loved you, I wouldn't have brought that girl into our apartment. When you love, you don't look at others. I did when I lived with you. Who needs you? Flashed through the man's mind as he executed the pre-planned move. 1 minute of embarrassment is worth a further contented, prosperous life. The man sank to his knees, right on the dirty tiles on the threshold of the courthouse. He clasped his face with his hands, pretending that tears were flowing. I'm sorry, Natalie. I can't do this without you. I can't do this at all. I'm dying. Arthur whispered, watching the woman's reaction through his fingers. And that's when the real tears started to flow, not from Arthur, but from Natalie. Stop it. Get up. She reached out her hand to her husband. Get up, please. Let's go to the car. We'll talk there. As a result, neither Natalie nor Artur showed up for this court hearing. Passers-by looked back in amazement at the car in which the couple were kissing in broad daylight. Natalie did not return to work that day. She and her husband had gone home together. Their home. There were tears of forgiveness, passionate confessions, and a day spent in the bedroom. Arthur swore that he would never look at anyone else in his life but his beloved. Natalie was hesitant to tell her mother that she had reconciled with Arthur, knowing her reaction. It was only when Julia told her daughter on the phone that she and Billy were going into town to buy stationery that Natalie had to confess. "You're a fool, Natalie. You're so stupid. You think you've got your head on straight, but you're back to your old ways. You need to regain your son's trust. He asked about you the other day. I thought you realized what your husband is like. I don't even know how to tell Billy about your reconciliation. The boy's gonna be upset again. He thought we'd be in town on vacation, staying with you." Julia said and hung up the phone. Time flew by, and now the grown-up Billy is finishing ninth grade. He had to decide on his future education, and he didn't want to leave his grandmother alone. They had been through a lot over the years, and Julia's health was noticeably failing. The ambulance came to them more and more often, and Julia was hospitalized several times. Billy never regretted for a moment that he had chosen to live here in the village. The school years had been happy, except for the frustrations of his grandmother's health. At the school prom, Billy was the most conspicuous boy in his new suit. Mom had made sure, as she had all those years ago, that she continued to dress her son well, as if to make amends. And she and Grandma didn't need money, thanks to Natalie. Billy flatly refused to stay in town, not wanting to spend a single day with his stepfather. In the assembly hall, decorated with posters and balloons, a beautiful girl walked in with Billy, and all the boys in the village, and not only the village boys, were looking at her. But it was only from the moment she arrived in the village that Leslie became friends with Billy, and by the ninth grade, this friendship had grown into something more. As Leslie twirled in the graduation waltz, she smiled at Billy, but he wasn't very cheerful. "Billy, what's the matter? Why are you always frowning?" Leslie asked her friend right after the dance. "Today, we have such a day. We've been looking forward to it." "Yes, we've been looking forward to it," Billy replied cheerfully. "Of course we did, don't mind me. The more I realize how hard it is for me to leave my grandmother alone." "So, have you decided where you're going to go?" "Yeah, I guess so. I'm going to be an auto mechanic. It's easier for you. You've been wanting to be a teacher for a long time." "I like cars and I like to work on them." "Are we going to see a lot of you in town?" Leslie was smiling. "Every day. That's a given. My mom insists that I live with my stepdad. It's kind of unseemly for me to live in a dorm when she has an apartment like this. I don't want to." "Billy, a mom's a mom. Maybe she was wrong about something. It's time to let it go. It's really stupid to live in a dorm." It was with great reluctance that Billy went into his mother's apartment. He went there with his belongings, intending to live there for the duration of his college education. As the boy had planned, he enrolled as an automobile mechanic. This profession was really interesting to him. Although his mother repeatedly offered Billy to live with her, the guy was still more inclined to the dormitory. But he was talked out of it by his grandmother, whose opinion he listened to. "Billy, why do you need a dormitory? Your mother has a large apartment. You will have the same room in which you lived before. Your family for all intents and purposes. And it's time to stop drifting apart. It's time to socialize. I'm not a girl anymore, and my health, well, you know how it is. When I'm gone, Mom will be the only person you'll have left." Billy cringed at his grandmother's words. He hated it when she talked about the time when she would be gone. The boy didn't even want to think about it. Billy, of course, could not know that his mother had not on her own initiative offered her son to live with her, for Arthur was strongly against it. The husband even tried to scandalize about it. It was Julia said to her daughter that her son should live at home and not dormitories, while having a mother with a large apartment. And so Billy unwillingly returned to the house from which he had so gladly moved a few years before. Arthur didn't see fit to say hello to the stepson. The man mumbled something like, "Here he is, nobody missed me." With that, he strode defiantly into his and Natalie's bedroom. Billy went to make himself comfortable in his old room. And from there he heard his stepfather behind the wall, not even trying to muffle his voice, telling his mother, "You're here. That's the end of our quiet life. Why did you bring him here? He would have been fine in the dormitory." Billy couldn't hear his mother's excuses. She answered her husband quietly. That's why the boy never knew that his grandmother insisted on his living here, sincerely wishing that his mother and son had finally found a common language. Billy, by habit developed in the village, woke up early in the morning. There were still a couple of days left before classes at the technical school. But today, Leslie was to come to town. The girl was enrolled in teacher training and was going to rent an apartment with two of her friends. Billy wanted to meet his girlfriend and help her settle in. Billy was brushing his teeth in the bathroom when he heard a high-pitched conversation coming from the open kitchen door. "Natalie, what is this? What are you leaving me these cents for? I don't even have enough for lunch at the cafeteria. I was gonna change the oil in my car today, and the grenade is rattling, so I'm gonna have it serviced." "Arthur, you know very well about my problems at work." Natalie exhaled tiredly. "I don't know how much I'll get paid this month. I've already been told that it will be much less than before, but I still have to figure out how much less. Let's do something about it. Maybe the service can wait." Natalie had never held a managerial position, but she was top-notch in her field. In addition, she could easily fill in for a translator and occasionally did the bookkeeping. The owner of the company Natalie worked for appreciated her abilities and diligence and expressed it financially. Only recently, to Natalie's dismay, he decided to move abroad and sold his company. Natalie did not get on well with the new owner. His eyes widened when he saw Natalie's salary. The man immediately said that he would not pay that much, and if a woman didn't like something, no one would keep her. Natalie tried many times to convey this to Arthur, but her husband didn't want to hear her and cut back on his spending. "No, I can't do that. If you can't maintain our old lifestyle, I'll have to get a job. You're the one who keeps resisting it." "Yes, I'll get a job. I'll work in a cab. I'll work day and night. So what if I don't see you much, but I won't have to beg you for money? I'll have my own." That's it, Arthur." Natalie raised her hands in a conciliatory manner. "Take it. How much do you need for this service?" The woman dreaded these conversations Arthur was having about work, especially when he started to say that he would be a taxi driver at night. Who would he be driving around? Drunk girls. At the mere thought of it in the woman's head drew terrible pictures of how these girls seduce her beloved. And they would, because he was so handsome. In the end, Natalie, with a heavy heart, again laid out the amount that her husband demanded, realizing that now it is not affordable for her. It was this scene that Billy entered the kitchen. He said good morning and started frying eggs for breakfast. Natalie had run off to work and Arthur and Billy were the only ones left in the kitchen. There was an awkward silence between them. Arthur sat at the table and hurriedly finished the rest of his coffee, catching disapproving glances from his stepson. Billy, who had grown up a long time ago and looked at many things differently, couldn't stand it any longer. "What? Are you still taking money from your mom? Don't you want to go to work? What are you, a puppy dog? Don't stick your nose where you're not wanted. Don't come into the kitchen while I'm here. You're acting a little bossy. You'll be out of here in no time." The guy expected something like that. He turned off the gas under the frying pan and, slowly wiping his hands with a kitchen towel, turned to his stepfather. There was an acerbic grin on Billy's face. Arthur's face changed several times as Billy approached him. Not only was the boy half a head taller than the man, but it was obvious he didn't neglect exercise, judging by the width of his shoulders and the lumpy muscles in his arms. Billy, almost gently, took his stepfather by the neck and pulled him upward, forcing him to his feet. Arthur made no attempt at resistance. His arms were hanging limply along his body, fear in his eyes. The boy brought his face close to his stepfather's and, looking down at him, said, "That was the last time I heard you say such words to me. If I hear you say it again, you're on your own. I'll break your arms and legs, and you can tell your mom that you fell, unless you want to get hurt more. And about me staying here, you didn't invite me, and this apartment isn't yours. Besides, this apartment was bought by my grandmother, so I have every right to live here, but you're nobody and your name is nothing. From now on, you're the one who's going to be quiet in my presence." Billy loosened his hand around Arthur's throat, and he jerked aside. The boy, smiling calmly, asked, "Do you understand? Did you hear me?" Yes. The man nodded cowardly, not looking Billy in the face. Although hatred raged in him, he realized he couldn't physically handle Billy. He was not the same boy who had left this apartment like a cornered animal a few years ago. Far from it. Since Billy's return to his mother's apartment, many things have changed, particularly Arthur's behavior. The man had become much quieter and no longer demanded the same amount of money from his wife. but was content with what she gave him. In addition, Natalie noticed that Arthur was no longer knighting her stepson. On the contrary, he seemed to leave the room as soon as Billy entered. The woman could not get Arthur to tell her what was going on for a long time. The husband kept his mouth shut, and then one day he exploded. "Your son is no longer a troubled teenager. No, he's a criminal, a real criminal, and you mark my word, he'll end up badly." When Arthur shouted all this in his wife's face, they were in the apartment alone. But at his last words, there was the sound of a key being turned in the lock. It was Billy returning from school. Arthur stopped abruptly. Natalie couldn't get another word out of her husband. She didn't try very hard. Everything suited her, in principle. The house was quiet. Her husband was quiet. Billy, in fact, rarely showed up. If anything, he only came to stay the night. He spent all his free time either with his girlfriend or working part-time. All Natalie could get from her son was for him to tell her what his girlfriend's name was and where she went to school. He refused to bring Leslie here and introduce her to his mom. On the one hand, Natalie didn't care. The woman was having problems at work. The new owner of the company was knighting her, and with each new knighting, he reduced her salary. Natalie had even considered changing jobs, but other places could not offer her half of what she had received under the previous owner. Only now did Natalie realize that the owner had really considered her a valuable employee by paying her so much money. The quality of life in the family had deteriorated considerably. Arthur frowned, but kept quiet, and he didn't mention going to work anymore, being satisfied with little. In fact, the man was waiting for Billy to leave the house. He wouldn't stay here forever, after all. He had 3 years of schooling, and maybe something would happen sooner. Maybe he'd get married. Arthur hated Billy, but he couldn't help it. The boy had scared his stepfather pretty badly the first day he got here. Billy was almost happy. His studies were easy, maybe because he'd gone where he wanted to go. They saw Leslie every day. Why wasn't Billy completely happy? It was because of his grandmother, who he went to visit every weekend. She was getting weaker and weaker. Frequent hospitalizations didn't help either. Doctors had long ago given up, saying that with such a diagnosis, Julia still lived quite a long time. In the beginning, they had much worse prognosis, and only Julia herself knew why she'd lived so long, or thanks to whom. When she took her grandson, she'd given herself the idea that she had to live. She had to get her grandson back on his feet. The woman piously believed that she had survived for so many years only because of that. By the end of Vanya's studies, the young people began to think about marriage, knowing that the guy immediately after graduation will be taken into the army. Leslie had 1 more year left in the pedagogical school. They thought for a long time, weighed all the pros and cons, and finally came to the conclusion that the wedding is better to play after the army. "Are you sure you'll wait for me?" Billy liked to ask his girlfriend, jokingly, but actually a little worried. Leslie took offense. "Billy, will you stop it? I'd wait for you even if I was in the army for 5 years. I'd wait for you for the rest of my life. Don't ever ask me that question again." Billy was only 3 months away from the end of school when Billy got an unexpected call from his grandmother's roommate in the middle of the week. "Billy, come over. Julia won't get up." The neighbor had called Billy during the couples class. Billy snapped out of it, not remembering to mumble to the class teacher about Grandma. She only nodded her head. "Go, Billy, of course go." The boy was late for the train, so he didn't hesitate to call a cab. Billy had money. He'd been working part-time at the car service since his freshman year, saving up for his wedding. Julia was lying on the bed with the blanket up to her chin. His heart sank when he saw how gaunt and small his grandmother had become. And the look, how different that clouded gaze was from his grandmother's usual sharp gaze. "Grandma, what are you doing? Why are you scaring me so much? Why are you lying down?" "That's it, Billy. I don't have the strength to get up anymore." The woman spoke softly, with a gasp. Billy went out to his grandmother's neighbor, also an old woman, who was tending to Julia's kitchen. "Here, I'm making Julia some soup. She's more of a liquor person these days." "Did the doctor come to see Grandma?" "What did he say?" "What did he say?" said the neighbor. "He said it's useless to hospitalize her. Our Julia will never get up again, and then, as God wills it, maybe a week, maybe a year. No one knows." Grandma needs care, Billy. I've been working on it for a couple days, but I can't do it. I'm not young. And my husband's nagging me about running my own place. Billy had a lump in his throat. He wanted to tear and throw, wanted to cut off a piece of his heart and put it in his grandmother's chest so that she would get out of bed and live a long time. She met him at the end of the street, looking out into the distance with her keen eyes. Natalie had gotten another reprimand from her boss and was already pretty pissed off. And then there was Billy, calling and calling, even though she dropped his calls. The disgruntled chief growled at the woman. "Who's calling you during working hours? Go answer it. There must be something more important than work." As she left the office, Natalie irritably called her son back. "Billy, if I'm picking up the phone, I can't talk. What is it?" "Mom, I brought Grandma over. She's out sick." It took Natalie a while to realize what her son was saying. "What do you mean? You brought her here? What do you mean she's sick? What is she, a bedridden woman now?" "Yeah, I'm telling you, Grandma needs care. She can't get up. Who in the village will look after her? I hired a car and we moved her here." Natalie ran out of work without even asking to leave. She imagined the look on Arthur's face. As it turned out, she had no idea. Arthur stood there like he'd been struck by thunder. "What is this, Natalie? What's going on? It's not enough we have your son. He's brought his sick grandmother. Who's gonna take care of her?" At that moment, Billy came out of the room where he had put his grandmother. Natalie, not answering her husband, immediately attacked her son. "Really, Billy? What were you thinking when you made that decision? Why didn't you ask me? I'm at work all day. Who's going to take care of me? Maybe you won't join the army. We should hire a nurse." "With what kind of money?" Arthur got upset. Yes, Natalie supported her husband. "Actually, Billy, you know money's not what it used to be. Why should I have to pay for a caregiver?" "Mom, I've been saving up for the wedding. You know I've been working part-time. I can pay for the first time with this money. After all, how much do you give your hubby every day? A caregiver costs a lot less." Big tears streamed down Julia's face. The hired nurse left the door of the room where the old woman was lying half open. So Julia heard the whole conversation between her daughter and her husband from word to word. "How much longer are we going to put up with your mother in our apartment? Can you smell it? Can you smell it? It stinks in here. It stinks of old age, medicine, urine. Our house has become an almshouse. I can't take it anymore." "Don't exaggerate, please. The nurse is very careful. There's no odor." "You don't say." "Yes, there is. You can't smell it. You're not in the apartment all day like me. Besides, there's a stranger in here all the time. I'm telling you, let's put your mother in a nursing home. She'll be fine there. They take care of people like her." "Arthur, how do you envision that? Billy's only been in the army a week and he's paid for 3 months worth of care. What am I gonna tell them when he calls?" "Don't say anything. You tell them it's okay. You don't have to tell that felon everything. And we'll cancel the caregiver's contract and give him his money back." Julia, even lying in bed in this room, felt the change in her son-in-law's behavior with the departure of Billy in the army. The man at once began to press his wife, some of it raising his voice at her. He reproached Natalie for not earning enough, and every night he berated her for having a bedridden mother in their apartment. The conversation continued, and Julia noticed with alarm that her daughter was beginning to give in. "Well, I don't know, Arthur. I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe Mom would be better off in a nursing home. But it's not like it's a quick fix. We have to find the right place. We have to do the paperwork." As soon as Natalie said those words, it turned out that her husband had already made the arrangements. "I've already found everything. Here, look." The man grabbed his phone and began to point the open internet page in Natalie's face. "See, it's a government institution. It's paid for out of the patient's pension, and I found a list of documents too. If you want, you can get them together in a few days." "It's not even in our town," Natalie exclaimed. "It would take at least 8 hours by car." "So?" Arthur asked in bewilderment. "So what? With my job, I won't be able to visit my mom. The chief is already nagging me. You know what my workload is. Why would you visit her? Did you visit her in the village? She's just an old woman lying there." "I don't know," Natalie said doubtfully. Even Julia, hearing the conversation, realized that her daughter had already made up her mind. And when Billy would call his mom, she's still in her right mind, then I won't be able to hide anything from him. Don't give the old lady your cell phone with you. What she wanted for in a nursing home. There's no need for her to call. The staff will call us without her. That's the staff mom can ask for the phone. Natalie, are you kidding me? Do you really think the old lady can remember Vanya's number by heart in her condition? Julia wiped the tears running down her cheeks in exasperation. And that's where the son-in-law is very wrong. She remembered her grandson's number even in her sleep, and she wasn't about to forget it. She had a heart problem, not a head problem. But at the same time, Julia realized she wouldn't call Billy and complain. Why? What could he do being in the army? He'd just get nervous, twitchy. Let him serve in peace. A nursing home is a nursing home. On the one hand, it might be better than here, listening to Arthur's constant tantrums and seeing his daughter's slanted glances. Billy was lucky. Thanks to his excellent physical training, he got to serve in the airborne troops. I must say, the guy himself dreamed of it and asked at the military enlistment office. The service didn't seem like fun. At first, it was very hard. Daily marching, training. In the evening, Billy would get so exhausted that he'd fall on the bed and pass out without a backward glance. Remembering to call Leslie and his grandmother, the only phones allowed in the unit were simple, push-button phones. They could be used once a day in the evenings, only for communication with relatives. But for some reason lately, dialing his grandmother, the guy heard short beeps. So Billy dialed his mom. "What's up with Grandma?" "Nothing, just the same old thing," Natalie answered reluctantly. "Yeah, we disconnected her phone. She's weakened and has trouble talking." "No, Billy, I can't put her on the phone right now. I'm at home." After talking to his mom, Billy was left with a lingering residue. Mom's not telling the truth. Her slurred voice and reluctance to talk about his grandmother. These concerns Billy shared with his girlfriend in a phone conversation. Leslie was not lazy and went to Billy's house, although the girl did not want to meet his mother. But the girl herself was strongly attached to Julia, in front of whose eyes Leslie's school years had passed. Besides, Billy was nervous, and she wanted to calm him down by telling him that everything was all right with his grandmother. It didn't work. Vanya's mom and stepfather did not let Leslie into the apartment. "What kind of inspections are these?" Natalie asked arrogantly. "It's not an inspection. I just wanted to visit Julia," Leslie said, confused by the woman's appraising gaze. "There's no need to visit her. Her mom's weak and not ready for visits." Natalie cut her off and slammed the door in Tanya's face. When Billy found out about it, he had a big fight with his mother on the phone, but there was nothing he could do. The unit in which he served was located far away from his hometown. It was unrealistic to go there and back for a leave of absence. So the guy served, content with his mother's reluctant excuses, without contact with his grandmother. Billy served almost half a year, becoming stronger and tougher. In the evenings, the boy was no longer falling off his feet as he had been during his first tour of duty. One evening, when there was still half an hour of free time left before lights out, he decided to call Leslie as usual and turned on his simple phone. This phone was supposed to be off all day long. Before he could dial Leslie, a message from the service provider popped up on the screen. 12 missed calls from an unknown number. At first, Billy wanted to ignore the text message, but then something niggled in his chest. 12 missed calls. Someone wanted to call very badly. What if it was from Grandma? Billy was right to suggest that. "Oh, it's Billy, isn't it?" The voice on the phone was a woman's voice, not old. "I was the one who called you today for your grandmother. She's bad, real bad. She feels like she doesn't have long to live, and she'd like to say goodbye to you. There must be some mistake. You've made a mistake. Why didn't Mom call me herself? Who are you?" "I'm a nurse at the nursing home where your grandmother is. I don't know about your mom, but I've never seen her here. And Julia's been here 5 months. Vanya's hand holding the phone began to shake. With his other hand, he clutched his head. "It's a mistake, the guy mumbled. "It can't be. My grandmother can't be in a nursing home." The head of the unit looked at the serviceman standing before him with bewilderment. "What vacation? What week? What are you talking about? You are not entitled to it yet. At most, a weekend leave." "I need it." Billy was stubborn. I don't know who needs what. Where's your company now? Getting ready to jump? Why aren't you with them? Get back to your men. You won't let me go, I'll run away, Billy said desperately. Court-martial me, do what you want, but I'll run away. The chief of the unit only now noticed the state of morale of this soldier. Desperation, close to hysteria. Well, he said, tell me what happened. When Billy, in a broken voice, told about the call from the nursing home, the man with the military bearing looked at him carefully. That's where you should have started. Do you think we're not human beings here? The chief opened his desk drawer with a jerk and pulled out a blank form and began to write on it. 5 minutes later, Billy was already skipping out of his office, clutching the form tightly. Just make it, just in time. The boy repeated to himself like an incantation. Grandma, wait for me, I'm coming. Julia was buried in her native village. Billy was in charge of transporting the body and organizing the funeral. It was a dreary, rainy day. The sky had been overcast since morning. The rain poured and poured, seemingly unwilling to stop at all. The very sky itself is crying for Julia, muttered a neighbor, standing in a tight bunch of villagers. The villagers had all come, despite the inclement weather. Julia was respected and loved here. Billy stood straight as a taut string with his head uncovered. Streams dripped from his short hair, mingling with tears. The boy watched stunned as the red velvet-covered coffin was lowered into the damp black pit. Nearby, huddled tightly together and holding Billy's hand, stood Leslie. She was sobbing at the top of her voice, as were many of the villagers. Natalie was the only one who couldn't squeeze out a tear, standing all alone, apart from everyone else. She shrouded herself in her drenched cloak and looked out from under her umbrella, irritated at Julia's morning sky. The villagers looked at her with distaste, and her son's gaze burned with hatred. Natalie felt uncomfortable under the stairs and wished only for it to be over. It would have been better if she hadn't come at all, but that would have been unseemly. Not a single person from the locals moved from their seats until the very end. It was only when the last wreath was laid on the earthen mound that people began to slowly disperse. They wandered on, talking quietly, remembering the deceased with kind words. Billy, supported by Leslie, was the last to leave. The girl stroked his wet sleeve and repeated, "It's all right, Billy. Grandma's had it. She's all right now. It's good you had time to say goodbye." Yes, Billy did, or rather Grandma, thanks to something strange that had sustained her all these years, was able to wait for her grandson. She was able to wait until the last thing she saw was her favorite face. And Billy had time to say thank you to his grandmother for having her. She had given him the happy years of his life, and that it was only thanks to her that he didn't drink and do drugs in some boarding school. "I love you, Grandma. You've changed the way I look at life. I was a troubled teenager, and you changed that." "You were never a troubled teenager," Julia whispered, breathing heavily. "It's your mother who's difficult, and that's my fault. You were always a good, kind, mischievous boy. I have no regrets. I've lived a long enough life as it is. It's just a shame you and Leslie didn't get married. She's a good girl. Take care of her." Grandma died quietly in her sleep, and Billy couldn't let go of her cold hand for a long time. Returning from the cemetery to his grandmother's house, where everything reminded him of his loved one, where the best years of his life had passed, Billy ran into his mother. By all appearances, she was waiting for him. Billy, trying to speak confidently, turned to her son Natalie. "I wanted to talk to you. When you get out of the service, where are you going to go? Back to this house?" "That's what you're worried about, Mom." "This house? Will I come back to you?" "I wanted to talk to you too, but about something else. How dare you send Grandma to a nursing home? What was I supposed to do? The nurse only worked until 6 p.m., and I sometimes worked longer than that. I just didn't have the physical strength to get up at night. Arthur and I decided that a special place would be better for Mom." "You and Arthur decided?" Billy shouted. Leslie, who had gone into another room so as not to interfere with the conversation between mother and son, quickly came back and, with a calming gesture, took the boy's hand. But Billy continued to scream. "So you decided that? Have you been in that outhouse yourself? Did you even realize where you put your grandmother? Did you see the conditions there? The only normal person there was the nurse. The rest of the staff is rude and insensitive. The stench is unbearable. The care of the bedridden is done out of hand. I am bitter to tears that my grandmother spent her last days in such conditions. She didn't deserve it. What does she care? Natalie snapped at her. She was lying down anyway. A difference, you say? A huge difference. Maybe Grandma would have lived longer at home, and maybe she would have waited for me to get out of the army. I'd have taken her. I wouldn't have left her with you for a minute. You. Billy gulped for air, holding back sobs. I used to try to make excuses for you, thinking it was Arthur who was leading you astray. I don't think that anymore. I don't know who's worse, you or your husband. Grandma and I were always strangers to him and he behaved accordingly. But you, Grandma wasn't a stranger to you. I've forgiven you for a lot of things, Mom. I forgave your dislike of me, your unfounded accusations. I even forgave you when you rejected me. But I can't forgive your grandmother. Do you hear me? I will never forgive you for Grandma. What are you even doing here? In the house of the man you betrayed? Get out of here. You have no right to be here. Billy, what are you doing? Natalie howled. Where am I going now? In the middle of the night, in this weather. I'm not gonna make it into town till morning. I was thinking of spending the night. Don't even think about it. Go away, I said. Billy took a step toward his mother with a glint in his eye that frightened the woman. No, she knew her son wouldn't raise a hand against her, but that hatred glittering in his eyes. Without another word, Natalie ran out of the house into the still raining rain. She remembered that she had forgotten her umbrella, but she didn't go back for it. Covering her head with the palms of her hands, she ran to the car, knee-deep in mud. Slamming the car door behind her, Natalie pulled some tissues out of the glove compartment and began wiping her wet face. She looked angrily at the windows of the house and hissed, "You're being bossy, son. And this house is not yours. It will be inherited by me as my daughter. After the army, you'll have nowhere to go back to. That's when we'll see how you'll sing." "We should sell the apartment," Arthur told Natalie confidently. "You have serious problems with your head. You need a good examination." Natalie, despite the terrible headache, jerked sharply. "Are you out of your mind? The apartment is all we have left. The car's gone. After the accident, it's beyond repair." Natalie had been in an accident that rainy night after her mother's funeral, driving home on a wet road, angry at her son, freaking out and hitting the gas. The woman lost control and went off the road. The car flipped several times, but strangely enough, Natalie herself was hardly injured. The hospital found no serious injuries to the woman. But after that, Natalie began to have severe headaches, the cause of which could not be found by any doctor. They all had their hands full, and the headaches were getting worse and worse. Natalie became distracted and could not cope with her usual work. Eventually, the woman was fired. In principle, she had expected it long ago from her always dissatisfied boss. He only needed an excuse, and here it was. Finding herself without a job, the woman realized with horror that she and Arthur have nothing to live on. All her accounts had long since been emptied, and she was unable to find a new job in such a state. Natalie was on strong painkillers. Nevertheless, when her husband talked about selling the apartment, Natalie was indignant. "No, why?" The man shrugged. "It can't go on like this. You need to find out what's causing your pain. You need to be examined at a paid clinic. We'll live in rented accommodation for a few months. Nothing terrible will happen. Then you'll inherit, sell your mother's house, cash in her savings, and buy another apartment. You've read how much houses in this village are worth now." As it turned out, real estate in Julia's village, and especially land plots, were in demand and fetching a decent price. The village became popular with oligarchs. They built their mansions for summer houses, and the land was bought up by a local farmer who started to expand. The farmer was the father, which Natalie couldn't know, of course, not being interested in her son's girlfriend. Natalie was counting on that inheritance. In addition to the house, Julia had some cash savings. As long as she was feeling well, she planted her huge plot of land with onions and gave the crops away in bulk every year. A long time ago, it was with this hard-earned money that Julia bought an apartment for her then-pregnant daughter. But after that, Natalie knew that her mother had also continued to sell onions. Natalie wondered if the only way out was to sell the apartment. There was nothing to live on, and these headaches were driving her crazy. Perhaps a good, paid clinic could determine the cause. Arthur, who persuaded his wife to sell the apartment, had his own selfish intentions. First of all, he wanted to get at least some money out of it. At least part of it, for the first time. This is in the first place, and in the second, another girlfriend of Arthur got pregnant and demanded from him money for abortion and moral compensation. She demanded it harshly, threatening that otherwise she would go to Natalie and tell her everything about their relationship. Arthur was going to leave the now moneyless Natalie anyway, but not right now. First, he would have to persuade her to sell the apartment and wait for the inheritance to get a piece of it. After a while, Natalie gave in to her husband's entreaties and agreed to sell the apartment. She didn't care anymore, as long as she could only start to be examined sooner to find out what was happening to her. A good apartment, not far from the city center, sold quickly. The money from the deal was transferred to Natalie's card, the PIN code of which Arthur had known for a long time. The first thing, the man decided to get rid of the annoying friend, blackmailing him. He would only give her money for an abortion, without moral compensation. Early in the morning, Arthur and Natalie left a small rented apartment, which they rented, paying for a couple of months in advance. They drove to the clinic for a consultation. When they got there, Arthur left the woman waiting outside the doctor's office, telling her he was going to get a coffee. The man left the clinic and dialed Maddie, whom he had only been seeing for 2 months. She was the one who threatened the man with her pregnancy. Arranging to meet near the clinic, Arthur went there on foot. Maddie stood near the entrance to the hypermarket with a disgruntled expression on her face. "I hope you didn't just pull me out of work for nothing. Did you get the money?" "Only for the abortion." Arthur cut me off. "No moral compensation. I will not pay you." The girl grimaced. "Aren't you afraid I'll go to your wife? Then you will not get this money. Either you take the money for the abortion and disappear from my life, or you get nothing. Go to your wife. Go wherever you want. I'm gonna divorce her soon anyway." Maddie thought that Arthur probably wasn't lying. He didn't care about his wife. She realized that a long time ago. If he didn't screw her over, she should take at least the amount he was offering. Arthur didn't realize that Maddie was a fraud. When she said she came home from work, she was lying. The girl had never worked a day in her life. She toured the cities and scammed rich suckers out of their money using her looks. You could say that Arthur had stumbled upon a copy of himself, only in female form. At first, fashionably dressed and looking after himself, Arthur seemed to Maddie rich Pinocchio. And when she realized that he is the same as herself, the girl decided that from a lousy sheep at least a piece of wool, and lied about the pregnancy. "Does this store have an ATM? Do you know?" "Come on, let's go and see." Arthur hurried Maddie, wanting to get rid of her as quickly as possible. The ATM stood right in front of the exit of the hypermarket. The girl was hanging around while Arthur was withdrawing money and saw the PIN code he was entering. Suddenly, a crazy idea appeared in Maddie's head. Why? She'd wasted 2 months of her life on this jerk. In that time, she could have hooked up with a normal daddy. This guy's just throwing her a pathetic handout. Especially since Maddie was going to leave this town anyway, and Arthur doesn't know anything about her except a fake name. The girl watched carefully as Arthur slipped the card into his wallet with a careless gesture and put it in the pocket of his fancy coat. "You know what, Arthur?" Maddie sang softly. "I'm sorry about what happened between us. I liked you a lot." The girl took a step towards the man and hugged him, whispering languidly in his ear, "Goodbye, I had a good time with you." At the same time, Maddie's nimble fingers fumbled in the pocket of his coat. Arthur returned to the clinic. The office where Natalie had been sitting before was empty, so the woman had gone in for counseling. "I can't wait for this to be over," sighed Arthur heavily. "I'm so sick of that fool Natalie. Brainless, even lost her job. I'll wait for the inheritance and divorce her at once." The man sat down near the office, determined to wait. It didn't take long to wait. After about 5 minutes, an anxious Natalie came out of the office with the telephone in her hands. "Arthur, what's going on?" "I was talking to the doctor, and the alerts on my phone kept beeping. I couldn't believe it at first. Look, my card is being charged. Alleged ATM withdrawals." "Arthur, where's the card? You have it, right?" When Natalie and Arthur entered the hypermarket where the ATM was, Arthur was nervous. They had come here for a reason. They had a police officer with them. and they were on their way to look at the surveillance tapes. Arthur, to himself, cursed Maddie with the last words. Not only had she stolen the card, but she'd had the good sense to withdraw the cash right here, as they say, without leaving the cash register. By the time of withdrawal, it was obvious that the girl waited only for Arthur to come out of the door and again rushed to the same ATM. The trio went into the security room, where the monitors were shining brightly. They were receiving video from all the cameras installed in the huge hypermarket. The guard nodded his head in agreement upon hearing the policeman's request. Yes, of course. So you want yesterday. Can you give me the exact time? Natalie took out her cell phone and told him the time of the first withdrawal. Then Arthur's eyes flickered and the man fidgeted. No, there's no need to check from now on. The first withdrawal was mine. I had to do something. Arthur was embarrassed under his wife's inquisitive gaze. There's no need to look from now on. Let's watch the next withdrawal. I must have just dropped the card. Or maybe it was stolen from you, said the policeman. No, let's look at the time of your withdrawal. The camera at the ATM was very well placed. Natalie could see in detail how her husband came in with the girl, withdrew the money and gave it to his companion. Afterwards, they hugged each other, and it was clear at a glance that the two men were not just friends. Then they walked out of the door together, and a couple minutes later the girl returned. She had taken out the entire daily limit, and on this card it was not a small one. Natalie's card was a rewards card. The police officer smirked. The picture of what had happened was perfectly clear to him. It seemed to her husband's mistress that he had not given her enough money and she had decided to take more. Natalie couldn't deny the obvious either, staring furiously at the screen. When Maddie withdrew the last of the money from the ATM and walked out of the camera's view, Natalie turned around to glare at Arthur, who was standing behind her. The man wasn't there, nor was he in the hypermarket itself. Arthur had escaped in the first shots. What's up? Are you going to file a report, or will you deal with it this way, family style? The policeman grinned. Of course I will. Natalie snapped at him. Where do you see family? That crook robbed my husband. After saying goodbye to the policeman, Natalie hurried home. She didn't really go home. She had no home now, only a rented apartment. She knew she would find Arthur there. Where else could he go? The woman was not mistaken. Her husband was there, packing his things into a suitcase. Ah, asshole, packing. Where are you going, you bastard? Where are you going? I understand you broke up with that other one of yours. Otherwise, why else would she pull your card? Just like the last time she'd caught her husband in the act, Natalie couldn't help herself. Bastard, bastard, she shrieked and began to slap Arthur's cheeks. Arthur missed the first couple of blows by surprise, but on the next swing he grabbed her hand and squeezed it, causing pain. Enough, the man growled. It's already clear, I'm leaving. Natalie was taken aback. This was not at all what she had expected from her husband. The woman thought he would crawl at her feet, begging for forgiveness like last time. And she knew she would forgive him again. What else could she do? How to be alone now? Natalie pulled her hand away and spoke without the same urgency in her voice. Where are you going, you bastard? Stay here, I won't kick you out. Just know that from now on you won't get another dime of cash from me. Arthur grinned and for the first time looked at his wife with a look that expressed his whole attitude toward her. It was an attitude he had been masking for years. It was contempt mixed with disgust. What are you saying? She won't give me any money. Do you really think I'm going to stay with you on those terms? What do I need you for without money? I'll be honest with you, I was going to leave anyway. Do you really think I need you? Like this. Look at you, what you've become, without the usual care. A horrible, sick old woman. But you disgusted me before. Yeah, I can finally tell you that. Seriously, could you believe that someone like me could love you? That's what your mother always told you. You're a fool. Arthur just enjoyed seeing Natalie's face change at his words. He had longed to say it to her face. He saw the anguish his words caused the woman and reveled in it. The man took all his belongings, bought with Natalie's money, and this time she didn't stop him. She didn't care about that. The woman sobbed in the chair, curled up in a fetal position. Neither when Julia had died, nor when her son had thrown her out of the village house with contempt, had Natalie felt half the pain she felt now. Arthur had become her life, her everything. And it turned out her mother was right, and so were her jealous friends. Arthur never needed Natalie himself, he only needed her money. Now it's gone and there's nothing to keep a man around. Natalie stood up and walked wobbly to the mirror. A wrinkled, unkempt old woman looked back at her. Her long, uncolored hair was streaked with gray. And the face. It was better not to talk about the face at all. Natalie recoiled from the mirror. She went to the bed and collapsed face down on it. The woman's body shook again with sobs. The policeman, who had been with the couple at the shopping center the day before, was a little surprised to see the victim the next day at his office. "Hello, why have you come again? The statement is made according to the form. We'll look for your thief. I'll let you know the results by phone." "I want to rewrite the statement," Natalie said in a hoarse, torn voice. "It was my husband who stole my card and stole money from it. Yesterday I kept quiet. He intimidated me." The policeman frowned, staring intently into the victim's face. "Woman, you shouldn't turn your family squabbles into a criminal case. I saw yesterday." "You didn't see anything," Natalie interrupted. "I'm going to report my husband. He stole from me. He and that girl were working together. Let him go to jail. Let him go to jail." Natalie's face twisted in silent sobs. "Give me the form. I'll write." Natalie shook her head as if she couldn't believe her ears. "What do you mean there's no inheritance?" "You're confused. My mother had a house in the country. She still has one. And I know for a fact she had money in her bank account. And I am her direct heir, her only heir." The notary, with barely perceptible judgment, stared at the woman sitting across from her. By coincidence, she was a little aware of the family's affairs. What an interesting daughter, who had turned Julia into a nursing home to die, and now came to claim her inheritance. The young notary, who knew Julia and Billy personally, even gloated a little, saying, "The house in the village is there, that's true. Except that it didn't belong to Julia at the time of her death. She transferred it to her grandson Billy as soon as he turned 18. Billy, I take it, is your son." "No way. What do you mean, reissued it? Is that legal? Can I challenge it?" Even though it wasn't professional, the notary couldn't hold back her snide grin. "Of course it's legal. You can try to challenge it, of course. It's your right, but it's useless. Julia was of sound mind, I can vouch for that. I did it myself, and I'm 100% sure you'll only waste your time and money." "Yes, that's right, money. What about the money?" "Mom still had it. Julia had no accounts at the time of her death. I didn't touch on that, that's banking, but I can tell you that because I know. At the same time, Julia closed her accounts and opened a new one in her grandson's name. So once again, you have no inheritance." Natalie walked out of the notary's office stunned. The news that there was no inheritance was a blow to her head. She had been counting on that money. Natalie had recently undergone brain surgery. In a paid clinic, they found a hematoma, apparently formed after the accident, and the woman stayed there to have the operation to remove it. Paid clinic, paid room, paid test, the operation itself, after all. The money from the sale of the apartment, which could not be cashed by the swindler, flew so quickly that Natalie did not have time to blink an eye. But even though the operation had been carried out in a good clinic, there were still repercussions. Natalie sometimes had tremors in her hands and lost concentration and attention. She became distracted, and her previous job was out of the question. The doctors said that with a good rehabilitation, the consequences of the operation could be eliminated, but where would the money for this rehabilitation be found? Natalie was sure that soon she would have it, so she didn't save much money. At least she had enough sense to pay her rent a few months in advance. Otherwise, she'd be on the street right now. Natalie walked from the notary to her apartment and gritted her teeth in anger. She was angry at her mother, at Billy. What right did he have to this house, to the money? And the woman was also angry at Arthur. Angry wasn't the right word, but she was suffering, hating him and longing for him at the same time. After Natalie filed a complaint against her husband, accusing him of stealing her bank card and withdrawing money from it, Arthur was arrested. Before the trial, Natalie went to see him. When the man saw her, he was overjoyed at first. "Natalie, please forgive me. I'm sorry for everything, for the rude words. I said it out of anger. I don't really mean it. I'm begging you. Please take the application." "Ah, you realize you're facing real jail time." Natalie grinned. I can even tell you firmly, you'll go to jail, Arthur. I talked to the prosecutor. You're looking at a year and a half. A year and a half for what? You know I didn't steal anything from you. You gave me the money. You gave me the card. You can't prove that. Then you'll go to jail. What do you want, Natalie? Arthur gripped the iron bars of the bars through which they were allowed to communicate and stared into the face he hated. Do you want me to beg? Do you want me to kneel? Come back to me, Natalie said quietly. Come back to me, but forever, and at the trial I'll say I was wrong. You didn't steal the map. Your girlfriend did. Arthur flinched and widened his eyes. He hadn't expected that, not even from Natalie. After all, how much this woman does not respect herself. Ready to forgive him endless cheating, all the words that he said to her before he left. Arthur was even flattered by such love for him, but to live with Natalie all his life. He laughed. You know what? I'd rather sit down. What's it gonna cost me? I'm in and out. My sentence will be over someday. Living with you is a life sentence. Living with an ugly, destitute invalid, it's worse than prison. Natalie walked out of the jail like a spitting image, even more humiliated than the first time. She hated the whole world, living on her last dime and eating cheap sausages. She had never fed her cat that kind of sausage before. There was one last hope. Billy was due back from the army any day now. He can't leave his sick mother. We'd have to go to him. Natalie took out her cell phone and looked at the amount of money left on the card. She had enough for the ticket to the village, but not enough to get back. Julia's house was noisy and cheerful. It was buzzing with the village youths, celebrating Billy's return from the army. The tables had been set by Leslie with the help of her parents, who looked after the house in the absence of the owner. Billy had allowed them to use his grandmother's huge plot of land, and Leslie's parents, in turn, had promised to give some of the money from the harvest for the wedding. Leslie couldn't get enough of her fiancé. If he went to the army as a boy, now he was a young man, tall, broad-shouldered, matured. The girl waited for him faithfully, and it did not occur to her to look at other guys. How could one notice others when she had the best? She admired and swooned with happiness that this handsome man in the uniform of the airborne troops belonged to her, only to her. Leslie, let's go out for some air, Billy whispered to the girl. They took hands and walked out of the house. Billy took the girl to a flimsy, but still standing wooden bench. Billy, have you had a little too much to drink? No, Billy shook his head. It's just that in the house I'm always waiting. It seems like Grandma's about to come into the room. I miss her so much. Here, on this very bench, she spent hours waiting for me. When I ran away from home, she waited. And then so often, when I was studying in the city, Grandma would sit and stare at the road, waiting. The boy gulped air and, trying not to cry, stared at the very road he was talking about. A lone figure was still walking along it, and something about the figure seemed painfully familiar. It's your mother, exclaimed Leslie, as the woman drew near enough to be recognized. Billy, not saying a word, frowned at his approaching mother. Billy, hello. Natalie made no attempt to hug her son, but instead shrank back, standing at a distance. Why did you come here? What do you want here? I told you everything after the funeral. I'm not changing my mind. Billy, I missed you so much. You're the only one I've got left. I broke up with Arthur and I realized how wrong I was about him. I know, Mom, Billy laughed. I know everything. And the circumstances under which you broke up with him. You lost your apartment because of that bastard. Grandma was so sorry she put it in your name when she bought it. I'll tell you something else. I know why you came here. You may be surprised, but the notary you were with knew Grandma personally. After your visit, she called me right away. You really need Grandma's money and that's why you came here. Did you? Well, face it, Billy, I'm more entitled to it than you are. I'm your grandmother's own daughter. And don't forget, I'm your mom. Mom? Moms don't do that. And neither do daughters. My grandmother was my real mom, and I will never forgive you for what you did to her. You? Billy choked. Look, just get out of here. Don't make this a sin. Natalie cried. Billy, I don't have any money, not at all. I can't buy a train ticket. I can't buy food. And I can't work. I have to get treatment. Billy looked with contemptuous pity at the woman he had once been so attracted to, so eager for her affection and warmth. "Wait here," he muttered, and dashed into the house. Leslie sat on the bench with her legs tucked under her and her head down. She had nothing to say to the woman awkwardly shuffling beside her. Billy came out and quickly slipped a $5,000 bill into his mother's hands. "Here, this one's for your return ticket and food. But this is the first and last time. I don't want to know anything more about you. I don't have a mother. I'm not kidding. Don't talk to me again." Natalie wandered back down the dusty road, dragging her feet like a beaten dog. Billy didn't look at her. He put his arm around Leslie's shoulders and pulled her into the house. "Let's get going, or our friends will be bored without us." Billy and Leslie's wedding was also in the village. Billy wanted to celebrate in a modest way, but his parents had made the most of it. The village was buzzing for 3 days. It's been a year. Billy, in a used foreign car, drove to an unfamiliar house. He rarely visited this part of town. Next to him, in the passenger seat, sat his friend. Actually, Billy had his own auto repair shop. He had bought a 2-story garage with his grandmother's money and remodeled it, starting his own business. Billy hired 2 of his former classmates to help him. Billy had golden hands and friends are very responsible. So, in a short time from the clients in the car service center was not an outpouring. And here, one of these customers tearfully asked the guys to drive up to his house for an extra fee. The old Neva did not want to start, and the client could not get to the car service. When the guys drove up, an old man jumped out of the gate to meet them. "I'm glad you didn't refuse. Let's go to the garage. My old lady is there." Billy's friend waved his hand. "We'll see now. Don't worry. I'll just run to that stand over there and get some water. It's hot. I can't breathe." "Billy, do you want anything?" "We'll go together," Billy said. "We'll be right back," he nodded to the customer. Entering the stall with the peeling door, Billy was stunned. Standing behind the counter was his mother, who had aged abruptly, with faded eyes. "Billy," she exclaimed with hope in her voice. "How did you find me?" "Give me a bottle of mineral water," Billy said aloofly, as if to a stranger. He silently paid and quickly jumped out of the stall. "Billy, who is this? Is this woman a friend of yours?" Billy asked his friend, who could barely keep up with him. "No, I don't know her." Billy cut him off.